Good morning and welcome to Mission Viejo's Memorial Day ceremony. Please bow your heads. Lord God, today is a day where we remember. We remember those who have given their lives in the cause of our freedom. We come today to remember and to give thanks, because these freedoms we cannot take lightly. And Lord, we know that the greatest thing that a person can do is to lay down their life for their friend. We find this in the words of Jesus, and we find this in the life of Jesus. And so we see in our fallen comrades today a message for us, a message of friendship, a message that we need to bear in mind every day so that we will remain thankful and so that we will remain free. We give you thanks this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Please rise as we welcome the U.S. Marine Corps Color Guard, Headquarters Battalion, 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, and please remain standing for the national anthem sung by Don Wright, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilman Greg Raths.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets regular, the bombs bursting air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please join me in our Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning. Please be seated. Thank you so much for joining us today as we honor the brave men and women who sacrificed their lives in the service of our country. As parents, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, grandparents and grandchildren, friends and neighbors, we come together to honor, remember, and thank those who protect our homeland, our freedom, and our democracy. I'm Wendy Bucknam, and I am honored to be the mayor of Mission Viejo. And on behalf of my fellow city council members, I'd like to welcome you to the city's Memorial Day observance. At this time, it is my privilege to introduce to you our Congresswoman, Mimi Walters. She has served as our elected representative of California's 45th Congressional District since 2008. And prior to 2008, she represented us in the California State Assembly and served as the mayor of Laguna Niguel. And please welcome our honorable Congresswoman, Mimi Walters.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mayor Bucknam, for the kind introduction. I am grateful to have this opportunity to be with you this Memorial Day, and I'm honored to represent California's 45th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Since I was first elected to Congress in 2014, I've been focused on a number of pressing issues facing our nation. But I believe two of Congress's greatest responsibilities are providing for our national defense and ensuring our veterans receive the care that they have earned. My father is a Marine. He actually was stationed at Camp Pendleton in the 1950s. So caring for our veterans is not just an important policy issue, it is also a topic that I care about on a deeply personal level. I have full appreciation for the service and sacrifices our veterans have given this country. Make no mistake, I am committed to ensuring that our veterans who have risked so much for our country receive the highest quality of care. Americans have a responsibility to honor and share the stories of the brave individuals that sacrificed their lives in defense of our nation. Last Thursday, I visited Arlington National Cemetery with some of my colleagues in Congress to commemorate the 20th annual bipartisan Congressional Women's Caucus wreath-laying ceremony. Beneath each of the headstones at Arlington Cemetery lies a brave man or woman who has served our nation. A powerful reminder that these men and women gave everything to protect our freedom. We laid a wreath at the Women in Military Service for America Memorial and honored 5 distinguished servicewomen, 1 from each branch of our armed forces. The memorial is dedicated to the servicewomen who have fought America's battle across the globe. It is because of them, their service, and their sacrifice that we live in the most free nation on earth. The banners hanging here tell the inspiring stories of men and women who were willing to give everything for their country. Sharing their stories of sacrifice is one of the small ways we can pay tribute to our nation's heroes. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, uncles, aunts, colleagues, and friends came forward to answer the call of duty. As President Lincoln wrote to a mother who lost 5 sons in the Civil War, they laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. We must pass their stories on to our children so they will understand the sacrifices made in the name of freedom and the costs that future generations may have to pay to preserve all we hold dear. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today, and thank you to Mission Viejo for hosting this event and displaying these banners. I appreciate the opportunity to join you in honoring our fallen heroes. Thank you.
And it's also a pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Franz Vanden Brock. Thank you also, Pastor Jackson, for your moving invocation. Pastor Jackson currently serves the city of Mission Viejo at the Presbyterian Church of the Master just down the street here, and a place that I go to every Sunday. Thank you also to our Marine Corps Color Guard, who are also members of our headquarters battalion, 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton. Our city is so proud to have the opportunity to support these great men and women of the battalion through the countless hours of volunteer work that our Marine Adoption Committee members devote to that effort, and you'll see many of those folks over here. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Dawn Wright for sharing her inspired rendition of our national anthem. You may recognize Dawn as the permanent national anthem singer for the Anaheim Ducks, and she is an Orange County native. We're so glad that she could be here once again today. This is one of our Mission Viejo traditions. And it is an absolute privilege to serve with my fellow council members and colleagues. And I've introduced our Mayor Pro Tem, but I'd like to introduce also Councilmember Brian Goodell. And then Councilmember Greg Rath. Thank you for doing the pledge, sir. Thank you. And for your service, both of you. It is with great pride that the city of Mission Viejo displays the American hero tribute banners that you see in the Kershaw Garden every year. The images and thoughts on these banners are a reminder of all that this country stands for, and more importantly, a reminder of what the price of freedom really is. Our military men and women are a testament to this belief. American Heroes Tribute Banner mission is to honor both the U.S. military personnel that have given their lives in the wars on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan, and their families through remembrance. Banners of the fallen are designed by their family. These banners displayed across the nation are a way to honor, preserve, and celebrate their loved one's memory. I encourage each of you to spend some time in the Banner Garden after this ceremony. There you will find many words of wisdom and inspiration from American heroes such as Sergeant Michael S. Evans of the United States Army, who wrote the following words in a letter that was only to be opened if he died in combat. And in this letter he wrote, "I gave my life so you could live. Not just live, but live free. Please don't forget what I died for, and never let anyone disrespect that." These many generations of heroes live in our hearts, and to our active duty and veterans here today, thank you for your service. Now I invite Mayor Pro Tem Sachs to introduce our esteemed keynote speaker. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Sachs.
Thank you, Wendy. Sorry I got up here too early. I was only following orders. Before I introduce our honored guest, I must say that there are 3 names on a wall that I never forget. And there was a cowardly act in London, or in Manchester actually, recently that reminded me of the words of Ronald Reagan. The ultimate determination in our struggle now will not be broken by bombs and rockets but a test of wills and ideas, and the values that we hold, the beliefs that we cherish, and the spirit of our resolve. It is time for us to increase the spirit of our resolve. It's an honor for me to introduce to you Colonel Andrew J. Bergen, currently serving as a logistics officer in the United States Marine Corps. He's a graduate of Fordham University as well as the Marine Corps Command and Staff College, the Amphibious Warfare School, the Norwegian Defense Command and State College, and the United States Naval War College. He holds a master's degree in security studies. His operational experience include Operations Guardian Retrieval, Noble Obelisk, Sea Signal, Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. His personal awards include Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, the Service and Combat Action Ribbon. He has also received the 2nd Marine Division's Tarawa Award as the division's outstanding lieutenant. It is indeed my honor, my privilege, and my thrill to introduce to all of you today Colonel Andrew J. Bergen.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, community leaders, business leaders, military, and veterans. Thank you so much for the opportunity to address you on this glorious Memorial Day. I'm actually pretty happy that it's overcast at this point. Maybe we'll beat the heat. My name is Colonel Andy Bergen. As mentioned, I represent Headquarters Battalion, 1st Marine Division down at Camp Pendleton. Headquarters Battalion and myself were very grateful for everything the city of Mission Viejo does in support of our Marines and sailors. I got to take some time here, though, to acknowledge our fellow citizens who have sacrificed so much as we celebrate this Memorial Day. Do we have any Gold Star family members present? Thank you, ma'am. Do we have any Medal of Honor recipients? Yeah, I didn't think so. I understand sometimes we're graced by the presence of such heroes. Do we have any World War II veterans? Thank you, sir. Any Korean War veterans? I know we have some. I've seen the hats. Thanks so much for all you did to keep America free during the Cold War. Any Vietnam War veterans? I'm sure we have some of those. Thanks so much, gentlemen. My father was one of you, and I'm very proud of his service as well. Do we have any Desert Storm, Desert Shield veterans out there? All right. Finally, any Iraq and Afghanistan veterans? Okay, now that I got you clapping, got the muscles moving, I can begin my my historical tirade here. But as I look back behind me here, you can't be help but be inspired by these heroes, so young, and they gave all, as Americans have done since the founding of our great nation. I'd like to mention a few who personally touched the Marine Corps, of course. Lance Corporal Gardner, Lance Corporal Hogan, who posthumously received the Navy Cross for his heroism. His family stays very closely connected to our division today. And finally, Major Megan McClung, you see her over there, again, gave all for our nation. Well, back to the lovely city here of Mission Viejo. As our battalion's adoptive city, your fantastic community provides all types of support for the division's Marines and sailors, both when we're back home in gorgeous Southern California, as well as when we're forward deployed. We are very proud of our continued relationship with Mission Viejo and sincerely appreciate the ongoing support from the Adoption Committee. Thanks so much for the gift baskets you send forward as our warriors continue to battle terrorism in the Middle East, the Christmas gifts that make holidays all the better for our young families from whom we ask so much, and for your recognition of the non-commissioned officer and Marine of the Quarter. Our battalion's relationship with Mission Viejo and the 1st Marine Division's relationship with many of the beautiful cities of Orange County make us stronger as we continue to forge important bonds with the communities that come into close and regular contact with our Marines and sailors. So thanks again. I want to talk about the history of Memorial Day as we humbly remember those who have given what President Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion to our nation, giving their lives in war and peace in the hope that their fellow citizens could thrive under our model of government. Today, the flag of the United States is raised briskly to the top of the staff and then solemnly lowered to the half-staff position where it remains only until noon. It is raised to full staff for the remainder of the day. The half-staff position remembers the more than 1 million men and women who gave their lives in service of our country. At noon, their memory is raised by the living, who resolve not to let their sacrifice be in vain, but remember their sacrifices in making our nation what it is today. The Memorial Day tradition began following our brutal and tragic Civil War, in which over 600,000 Union and Confederate service members perished. The tradition of decorating graves of soldiers from earlier conflicts, as well as ancestors during the spring, predates today's occasion. Southerners began commemorating their dead in 1865, and 3 years after the war, in 1868, veterans of the Union Army began Decoration Day as a time to remember the war dead. Similar traditions continued across the nation until a federal holiday began to emerge in the early 20th century and was finally codified into law in 1967. We must also keep in mind the population of the United States back then was 30 million, less than a tenth of what it is today. To put that in perspective, today it would be 7 million Americans that would perish in a 4-year period. 3% of the American population perished during the Civil War. Most citizens lost one or several close family members and friends. As many of you know, today's military is deployed around the globe, destroying terrorist networks that threaten us, our friends and our allies, while deterring others that would do our nation harm. Those at home work daily to ensure a high state of readiness and preparation. We work to be most ready when our nation is least ready. Moving on, I want to provide you a snapshot of what our armed forces are doing today. The United States' forces deployed in more than 150 countries around the globe, with nearly 150,000 Americans active duty serving outside the United States. Some of them are in chaotic and terror-prone areas like Iraq and Afghanistan, Somalia, the Korean Peninsula, and other hotspots around the world. They're out there right now, prepared to conduct the full spectrum of military operations from combat to humanitarian disaster response. They are standing guard as crisis response forces, and they are training with foreign militaries. They're out there right now, those Marines along with men and women of our great Army, Air Force, Navy, and Coast Guard, continuing the important work of those we take time to honor here today. Those we honor left a great legacy, and safeguarding that legacy can be demanding, especially in face of the complex challenges our service members face today. However, those challenges are manageable due in no small part to the example of those who have gone before. We stand on their shoulders, the shoulders of giants, and the indomitable spirit they have woven into the fabric of American culture is a tremendous advantage. That spirit is an advantage that can't be measured, it can't be replaced by advanced technology, and it certainly can never, ever be faked. I have seen this spirit in action throughout my time in service across the globe. I've spoken with families and service members who served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Panama, and several other places. All have witnessed this spirit firsthand. While we're dedicated to never letting it happen again, there have been times in our history when we have not had the advantage in weapons, equipment, and tactics. But throughout that same history, our service members have never lacked a reason to persevere. The demonstration of will to uphold the tradition of our predecessors, those who paid the ultimate price for our freedom, and their ability to inspire, strengthen, and encourage has pushed many a Marine, sailor, airman, and soldier when all they want to do is pull back. Their refusal to fail dates to the birth of our republic, and it is contagious as ever today. I can assure you of this. I'd like to cite a story from part of President Ronald Reagan's first speech in office, his inaugural address in 1981. He was speaking about knowing where to look for heroes and inspiration in modern-day America. He related the story of a young man from Iowa named Martin Tripto, who volunteered for military service during World War I. Private Tripto deployed to France as part of the Allied Expeditionary Force, and while serving as a courier, was killed in an artillery barrage while running a message between battalions. His diary was found with his body, and he had this inscription written on the front: "America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost, as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone." Those are the people we remember today. So many ordinary people who did so many extraordinary things in face of great danger and unimaginable horror. So many that fought to establish our country didn't live to see it. So many that fought to preserve the Union but were unable to see it rebuilt. So many that fought back against the powers bent on world domination during World War II, but didn't live to see our nation in place the great diplomatic and economic structure that enabled an era of peace and great prosperity. They didn't see the interstate highway system a truer integration of our nation during the heroic achievements of the civil rights movement, our reaching for space, for the moon and beyond, and finally the falling of the Berlin Wall. All those who sacrificed did not live to see these things. It's difficult to imagine how different our world would be if these young men and women were not there when history needed them most. The freedoms we enjoy today cost many lives. Over 1.3 million, as I mentioned earlier, have given their lives in the service of our nation since the American Revolution. The lesson of history tells us that the future defense of those freedoms will also be paid for in blood. Paying tribute to our fallen heroes is an idea that traces its origins back to the end of the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, more than 24 centuries ago. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to give you 2,400 years of history, okay? But I want to make a few points. It's important to mention that at this time, the Athenian leader Pericles, the founder of modern democracy, said in talking about those who died in service of Athens, not only are they commemorated by columns and inscriptions, but there dwells also an unwritten memorial to them, graven not on stone, but in the hearts of their men. Okay, that's what we're doing today. It's in our hearts as we think of our fallen comrades. Carried within the ancient tome of Thucydides' admonition to remember that only the dead have seen the end of war. His words steel those of us who serve today. I want to close with a favorite quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., as we remember all those who sacrificed in defense of our great nation. Just as Holmes said, "Grief is not the end of all. I see beyond the forest the moving banners of a hidden column. Our dead brothers still live for us and bid us think of life, not death. Of life to which in their youth they lent the passion and joy of the spring. As I listen, the great chorus of life and joy begins again, and amid the awful orchestra of seen and unseen powers and destinies of good and evil, our trumpets sound once more a note of daring, hope, and will." Thank you again for the time-honored invitation to join you today. Thank you for all the City of Mission Viejo does to support our Marines and sailors. God bless the United States, the United States military, and all who have served, past and present. Thank you very much.
Dearest son, it's almost June. I hope this letter catches up with you, finds you well. It's been dry, but they're calling for rain, and everything's the same old same in Johnsonville. Your stubborn old daddy ain't said too much, but I'm sure you know he sends his love. And she goes on in a letter from home. Hold it up and show my buddies like we ain't scared, and our boots ain't muddy, and they all laugh like there's something funny about the way I talk when I say mama sends her best, y'all. Fold it up and put it in my shirt, pick up my gun and get back to work. And it keeps me driving home, waiting on letters from home. My dearest love, it's almost dawn. I've been lying here all night long, wondering where you might be. I saw your mama and I showed her the ring. Then on the television said something, so I couldn't sleep. I'll be alright, I'm just missing you. This is me kissing you. X's and O's, and a letter from home. Hold it up and show my 'Cause she calls me honey, but they take it hard, 'cause I don't read the good parts. I fold it up and put it in my shelf, pick up my gun and get back to work. And it keeps me driving on, waiting on letters from home. Dear son, I know I ain't ready, but sitting here tonight alone in the kitchen, it occurs to me I might not have said it, but I'll say it now. Son, you make me proud. Hold it up and show my bodies like we ain't scared, and our boots ain't muddy, but no one laughs, 'cause there ain't nothing funny when a soldier cries. And I just wipe my eyes. I fold it up and put it in my shelf, pick up my gun and get back to work. And it keeps me driving on, waiting on letters from home.
Thank you, Don. And thank you, Colonel Bergen, for your service and for sharing this day with Mission Viejo. Our guest speaker today is Franz Vanden Brock. Franz entered the U.S. military in 1966 and deployed to Vietnam in 1967 with the 68th Assault Helicopter Company, also known as the Top Tigers. Based in Bien Hoa, South Vietnam, from November 1967 to March 1969 as a helicopter crew chief and door gunner, he flew numerous combat missions totaling approximately 1,000 flying hours. During his Vietnam tour, he lost 4 helicopters and 2 pilots to enemy action and crashes. He was awarded the Purple Heart, the Army Air Medal, the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, and the Distinguished Flying Cross, an award mostly reserved for pilots. In 1969, after being discharged from the Army, Franz earned a degree in mechanical engineering from California State University, Long Beach, with the help of the GI Bill and a 30% disability rating. He currently holds 10 patents for medical devices and has spent the last 26 years working for Applied Medical Resources in Rancho Santa Margarita, where he resides with his wife Karen and 2 daughters, Hillary and Sarah. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Vietnam veteran Franz Vanden Brock.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodell, for the kind introduction. And thank you folks for being here today and sharing this very special event with us in this amazing setting. I was here last year, and Mayor Frank Urey, mayor at the time, opined that in his view, no one does Memorial Day better than the city of Mission Viejo. And looking around us, it's tough to argue that point, isn't it? Today is Memorial Day, and while much of America is preparing for picnics and barbecues, you folks chose to be here. And you're here because you realize that every benefit, every privilege, every advantage you have in your life today, you have because sometime in this nation's history, an American soldier gave his life for it. That soldier has a name, And chances are, some of you might have brought that name with you. Someone you knew, someone you loved, or perhaps just someone you saw on a banner hanging from a scaffold. There are two soldiers whose names are with me every single day. Warrant Officers Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen were helicopter pilots who perished in Vietnam on helicopters that I was the custodian of. In the spring of 1968, I served as a Huey helicopter crew chief assigned to the 68th Assault Helicopter Company, the Top Tigers based at Bien Hoa, northeast of Saigon. My job was to make sure that the helicopter assigned to me was always safe and ready when it was time to fly. And just to make sure that I did my job with due diligence, the Army required that whenever my helicopter was in the air, I was to be on it. My spot was a little canvas stool in the open doorway on the left side of the cabin, where I sat pretty much out in the open with an M60 machine gun in my hands. Did I mention I was 19 years old? I began flying combat missions in Vietnam in April of 1968, and by mid-May, I had lost 3 helicopters and 2 pilots, Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen, to enemy action and a crash. By June, I was transferred to the gunship platoon. Helicopter gunships are heavily armed attack helicopters, and when a gunship flies, it has only one mission: find the enemy and engage him. I flew gunships until November 1968, when my year in Vietnam was over. But then, instead of rotating home, I concluded my place was with my buddies in Vietnam, and I extended my tour 6 months and made 3. On March 23, 1969, while attacking an enemy position, my gunship plowed into the ground, rolled over, and disintegrated. And after having survived 1,000 hours in the air in Vietnam, I was medevaced out of the country, a 20-year-old casualty of the war. Recovery took over a year. In the meantime, I was discharged in July 1969, only to be ambushed by an indifferent and even hostile American public. And in response, bitter and disillusioned, I turned my back on Vietnam, on the U.S. Army, on broken helicopters, and, I'm ashamed to say, on Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen. And as for Memorial Day wasn't a day to remember. It was a day to forget. But as the years went by, Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen wouldn't allow me to forget. Both were simply standing by, waiting patiently, waiting for me to come to my senses. That process took 35 years. Shortly after the turn of the century, while on a business trip in Washington, D.C., sitting in my hotel room late at night, I held a sudden urge to visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the wall. And there, in the dark, just before midnight, Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen re-entered my life. I wondered where they grew up. I wondered where they were buried. I wondered if they'd left any family. And so I got on the internet and found out that Paul was from Circleville, Ohio. There are 7 cemeteries surrounding Circleville. 6 hadn't heard of him. The 7th said, yes, he is here. And so in May 2011, I made a pilgrimage of sorts to Circleville to visit Paul. We had a nice chat. I also met his sister, Paula, and she in turn promised to try to find for me Paul's widow, who had left Circleville shortly after Paul was killed. I met Linda Cahill in Marietta, Georgia, in September 2012. Charles Clifford Van Allen I found at a cemetery in Mount Vernon, Washington. Charles was just 20 years old and on his very first combat mission when an enemy bullet bored into his chest. I was holding Charles when he took his last breath. Charles came from a broken home. He had no immediate family, just a couple of distant aunts, one of whom was over 90 years old. The three of us brought Charles some flowers, and I promised Charles and Paul I would never neglect them again. But Circleville, Ohio, and Mount Vernon, Washington are a long ways from Mission Viejo. Saddleback College is near. There's a Veterans Memorial there, created, designed, and constructed by the Ceramic Arts Department. And if you've not seen it, I recommend that you go. You'll find it peaceful there. The memorial is surrounded by a series of engraved tiles embedded into the ground. One of those tiles reads, "In memory of Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen, killed in action, Republic of South Vietnam, May 1968. From your crew chief, Van." If you visit the memorial today, you'll have no trouble finding that tile. There's an American flag and flowers on it. The reunion with Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen got me to thinking, was there a point to their service in Vietnam? What exactly is these men's legacy? What will our legacy be once we're gone? It's a difficult question to answer because for many years, we Vietnam veterans were pariahs in the community. Other vets that came before us were treated with dignity and respect, but not us. We were the black sheep from the wrong side of town, despised and rejected and called vicious names. Misfits, drug addicts, baby killers. And so in response, many of us quickly learned to keep our service a secret, played it close to the vest, didn't talk about it much. And in that process, some of us did irreparable damage to our psyches. And those of us who did eventually muster the courage to reveal our secret identities then had to deal with pseudo-intellectuals who delighted in ambushing us by asking awkward questions. Questions such as, how do you Vietnam veterans feel about losing the war? Do you think the war was worth it? Why did so many Americans have to die when in the end it made no difference? Well, how do we feel about losing the war? We don't, because we didn't. American soldiers won every significant battle in Vietnam and eventually depleted the enemy to the degree where they had little choice but to sign a peace treaty in Paris, 1973. Only after we left did the North reinvade the South. There's a contemporary lesson in there someplace, isn't there? Do we think the war was worth it? Sadly, the answer depends on your perspective. If you lost a son, a brother, a husband, a father in Vietnam, you might answer that question one way. But if you're one of the hundreds of thousands of South Vietnamese boat people who fought alongside of us in Vietnam and who lost everything to find freedom in America, your answer might be different. Today, some of their children serve in our military, ironically, fighting and dying for our freedoms the way we once fought and died for theirs. And then there's the cruelest question of all. Why did so many of you buddies have to die when in the end it made no difference? Perhaps an answer can be found by examining the personal motives each of us had when we fought in Vietnam. And after all, you can never truly understand war until you understand the personal motives of the warriors. I can tell you this. When the bullets began to fly and the explosions were all around us, the last thing on the minds of helicopter crews in Vietnam was the domino theory. democracy for Vietnam, American prestige. Our total focus was on saving the lives of our brothers on the ground below us, and their focus was on survival and saving the lives of their buddies fighting alongside of them. From my perch in my helicopter, I saw young Americans risk and lose their lives trying to save the lives of their buddies. We fought for each other. So perhaps our buddies died so that we could live, so that we could return to America and then try to make a difference. This Vietnam veteran stands before you today trying to do exactly that, make a difference. And throughout America, other Vietnam vets are doing the same with tremendous results. In the decades since we served, the conscience of the American people finally caught up with and left in the dust the shameful way we were treated when we returned from Vietnam. Today, soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan march proudly and safely through airports, readily identifiable and looking sharp in their spiffy camouflage uniforms, and are greeted with smiles and applause and handshakes and hugs from strangers. Those strangers are the children of the people that never came to the parades we never got. Vietnam eventually taught America that it's okay to hate the war, but never the warrior. So if it was the job of the Vietnam veteran to pour the foundation for the honest, appropriate, ethical, honorable treatment of young men and women who fight for our freedoms today, such as these sharp-looking Marines in the front row, then perhaps that's the difference that we made. Not a bad legacy, don't you think? And it's the legacy of Paul Hill and Charles Clifford Van Allen and 58,000 others whose names are carved into a wall in Washington, D.C. And it's the legacy of every one of you who served in Vietnam. Today is Memorial Day, and while much of America is preparing for picnics and barbecues, you folks chose to be here. And chances are when you came, some of you might have brought with you the name of a soldier, someone you knew, someone you loved, or perhaps just someone you saw on a banner hanging from a scaffold. That soldier is here, with us, right here, right now. And he has a simple request. Please, don't forget me. I think I can safely speak for all of us when I say to that soldier, don't you worry, my brother and sister. The citizens of Mission Viejo never will.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vanden Brock. Thank you. Sorry. And I want to thank each and every one of you today for joining us and honoring the sacrifice of so many. The losses weigh heavy on our hearts, while the inspiration we gather by hearing those stories soothes our souls. I know that we have many people here today who have served. If all of our active duty military would please stand. Thank you. And our veterans, would you please stand? And to the families of those soldiers that didn't come back, we salute you and we thank you for your service, and we hold you dear in our hearts. As we close this ceremony, please remain seated as Dawn sings the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which will then be followed by the 3-volley rifle salute and taps. If you have small children directly following the song, please prepare them for the 3 loud rifle bursts. Following taps, our young Marines volunteering their services today will lead you through the Banner Garden behind me and to our reception in the Saddleback Room for coffee and light refreshments. I would like to leave you with this quote from President Franklin Roosevelt, who said, "In the truest sense, freedom cannot be bestowed. It must be achieved." Thank you, and God bless.
Of the coming of the Lord, He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He had loosed the faithful lightning of His terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with the glory in His bosom that transfigures you and me, as He died to reign